review of the precepts. And by way of starting out, I'm just wondering, is there anyone here who, when you hear the words, the sentence, the 5 precepts, doesn't know at all about what we've been talking about, have just kind of very sweetly stepped in here tonight and this is all new? Anyone? Okay, all right, so that helps me. So what's important, and I'm going to be handing the precepts out actually as we begin, is that the precepts, as they sound a little maybe forbidding or foreboding, are invitations. They are not commandments, they are not rules, but they are invitations not only to explore, well, I should say to explore. They're invitations to inquiry as well, as to see what is rising in this moment without judging, and what then, how do I respond to what's rising in the moment, and act on that, or act with some restraint, which is to say, I don't, if I'm dying for some more food there, and I have to go for that second rack of cookies because I can't stand it, it smells so great, working with that tension of craving, for those cookies, but without judging. That's the tough part, right? So recognizing as well, foundational to understanding the precepts, is that whatever energies may be rising, they're rising because they're rising. We don't always know. Causes and conditions at that moment have come together. They are human things that are rising, human energies. And so in that respect as well, not personal. They are impersonal. So when we begin to really work with some depth with the precepts, interestingly enough, we can really begin to see also these are gateways to deeper understandings of the Dharma as well. Underlying the understanding of the precepts is the recognition of, working with that value, that I would say ethic of do no harm, ahimsa, do no harm. It is not only doing no harm to oneself, but likewise doing no harm to another, because oneself and another are very deeply interconnected. And that is a very important understanding here from the Buddhist perspective, because when we can really begin to internalize and to integrate that understanding, it's very hard to hold enmity towards someone else. It's very hard to wish someone some harshness towards them, or to be hurtful in some way. Not to say that that doesn't arise, just because it may, but to act on that becomes a little bit more, we become a little bit more mindful as to what is this, what is going on. And because to hurt another is to hurt oneself, and to hurt oneself or another is to hurt others, because there is a karmic effect. And by that, I don't mean anything mysterious, I simply mean the fruit of action. So things can carry forward without even our awareness as to what their effects may be on others. Sort of kick the can, it just kind of reverberates through someone's day, your day, and it just plays in these very unskillful ways. So that's the importance of understanding. These are principles of restraint, which sounds very negative and scary, but actually it is, and I said this last time as well and other times, we're saying in that restraint, a pause to say no to something, but we're also saying a no to something to say yes to something else. So the precepts and even that value of do no harm is really not a passive concept. It's a very active one. Active in the sense, at least minimally, how our heart responds, how our mind responds, and how we take into consideration what is skillful action right here in this moment. And not only then necessarily in that moment, but over time. Because some of these things may not rise in the moment, but they're in the culture, and they are a risk for others to have things arise for them. For example, as we begin, let's see. Let's just go through this very briefly together, because what we're going to do at the end of my pulling this through for you a little bit is to have you have a few moments of reflection, of some silence and some real inner reflection, and then perhaps even taking some notes if you care to. And then if you're willing, we can also break into some groups so we can, maybe explore it in more depth. So the invitation this evening is this sort of inner opening of yourself to what is rising when you hear the precept read, when you're reading it yourself, and what's coming up around that, and what ones in particular may be calling you, or what is it about that. So the first one, and this is an example again of what we're saying no to what we're saying yes to. We're investigating, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life. And in this sense, we then vow to cultivate compassion. This is the positive piece of trying to say no to this, or look at the no to this to say the yes to this. So I vow I'm taking the precept to practice, to train in compassion, to learn the ways of protecting the lives of people, animals, and plants. And this can be something that is very in the moment as you're ordering food in a restaurant, or making your list, or reading, going to a farm, or reading about things on the internet about what's going on in different animal communities. So it can go from the very personal all the way on up to what is even legislated in terms of protections for animals and for plants and for species who are even facing, as we know, very rapidly extinctions. So these precepts have nuances as well, and again, they have a full range. The second one is aware, again, that invitation to inquiry, of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression. With that awareness, I vow to practice, to cultivate loving kindness, and to learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, and plants. I am determined, this is an intention here that's being addressed, not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And you can hear how that stealing here goes from maybe taking something that does belong to someone else. This is something a little kid might do as well. That's mine, and they really have to have it. That's sort of craving in its sort of most obvious manifestation, right? To exploitation, to taking something from someone's right to have the dignity of being a human being. They're not having healthy housing because there's some sort of landlord that's not taking care of the water or the heat and things of that sort. So it crosses many boundaries here. The third one, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct. And in this regard, I vow to cultivate my responsibility for my own sexual energies and actions, and to learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. We all know the stories of abuse, and often it's through power in different power structures, of one in power taking advantage of someone who is has the less power in that relationship. Teachers, people of the cloth, coaches, but that's the negative piece of it. Also, the other piece of this, working with sexual energies comes up even in our own relationships, as in partnerships, and that's a very positive piece there. How can how can sexual energy be, which is a very healthy when it's carried in its healthy ways, also be a very healthy part of one's relationship in whatever form it may take, whether it is an active sexual relationship or it is one of a mutually agreed celibacy. However, There's not a right or wrong here. It is what is driving this and what is important about, and how sexuality in that regard is also part of the path. You know, how all of these things bring us into that place of a deeper understanding of the not objectivity of each other, but that individual, that right of the individual, and that even though we are individual, we're still not separate. That's sort of the paradox and nuance of these teachings. So they're not their objectivity, but their sensibility and their wholeness and their own sacred presence. So how do we come into sacred presence with each other? And that's also part of not just not doing no harm, but what we are doing, coming into sacred presence and acting from that place. So the fourth one, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to the suffering of others. I vow to cultivate loving speech and deep listening. And loving speech is not necessarily having to say I have to love the person who I'm listening to or speaking to. Because when we're talking about love here, we're also talking about non-attachment. We're talking about loving them because they have, even if they're being very harsh and hurtful and maybe even saying things that are very damaging and proposing things that are very hurtful, they're a human being as well. And they may be out of touch with their own sacredness and their own humanity. But to respond to them, if we can respond out of that loving kindness and that deep awareness that they too are suffering when they speak that way. They too are suffering and they're feeding suffering. How do we then counter that with our own very firm and clear speech, but coming from a place of love? And this is very important as we are in the times that we're in right now. You know, how to feel you have a voice, not lose your voice because you don't want to be hurtful, but at the same time speaking from a wholesome and loving place with great clarity. Number 5, and the last of the 5 precepts, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption. I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. So another name for these precepts, is one Thich Nhat Hanh gives to it, is the 5 mindfulness trainings. So they really draw on the practices that we learn when we're sitting down on the pillow, and they are all a part of that deepening path to freedom, of how we are less driven by whatever rises, reactivity, and how we can stop and pause and be responsive in a very healthy way that builds on this sense of our interconnectedness, and what we do in this world matters and bears fruit. So I invite you now to take a few moments of just looking or holding, if any of these come to you right away, but just scanning down. And as you are doing this, you know, allowing yourself to feel it fully. What is calling to me here? What is raising my curiosity? How might this be playing in my life? How might I like it to play in my life?